Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tools, the travel company led by reporters around the world. Cory Booker's 25-hour Senate filibuster was exceptional, not just for its length. It's perhaps the most notable course of action the Democrat has taken since Donald Trump has come to office. Democrats have been on the ropes since their election loss and floored by the audacity of the president's new regime as it tears up democratic norms and trashes old alliances. So why are they so much on the back foot? Former Michigan Democratic Party chairman and election strategist Mark Brewer joins us from Motor City. Hello and welcome, Mark.
Great to be with you, Nicholas, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We saw you briefly on a few days before the election took place, and I think you shared our skepticism about democratic fortunes, which really is a reminder that this rot goes back some time. I mean, Donald Trump was not a surprise. They knew he was a target for a long time. Why were they so bad at dealing with him?
Well, I think there are a variety of factors. First of all, the election was very close. In terms of the popular vote, particularly in the three battleground states. But Trump has run the country like he has a mandate, and he's defying people to stop him. That's been very difficult for the Democrats in the Congress, even though they have tools at their disposal that they should be using. You were right to point out Senator Booker's speech. That was a very moving moment. But the Democrats, particularly in the Senate, have the ability to really slow Trump down, even though they're in the minority. They're starting to use those tools, but they should have done that starting in January. The Democrats in the House are in a much more difficult position. They don't have those kinds of tools. So much of the resistance has fallen to Democratic parties in the states, to Democratic elected officials in the states. So you've seen a wide variety of responses. There have been a number of governors who've been very strong in opposition, but there have been governors also like our governor here in Michigan, who has been trying to accommodate Trump so far to no avail. There have been a lot of party resistance on the Democratic Party's part, but again, we don't hold any levers of power to do that. So, we're in a very difficult spot in terms of pushing back. We've come to rely upon the courts, which so far have done a pretty good job, I think, but courts are slow. Trump appointed, a significant number of our Supreme Court justices, so we can't ultimately rely upon the courts. Ultimately, this is a political problem. Unfortunately, the elections are 18 months away.
Well, that's an excellent summary of where we are, and I want to dig into some of those things in just a tick. But I do want to go back to the election, because this is the point is, more generally, is how do you respond to Trump? And even before he came into office again, it seemed to me that the Democrats didn't have a clear message back in October before the election. If you think of Kamala Harris, it seemed to me that she was being baited by Trump and just responding to him, which is the danger all the time. So I want to take you back just to that. Why couldn't they come up with a clear message?
Well, I think there are several problems. One, she was very closely tied to the incumbent president, and she apparently felt compelled to defend his record, which overall was an excellent one. But there were vulnerabilities on the economy. Inflation has been particularly bad. And Trump really played to that. And I think there are a lot of voters in this country who are willing to overlook his other shortcomings, his other serious faults, because they thought the economy would be better under Trump. So that was one problem. Harris getting into the race so late, again, not her fault, but basically she was handed a campaign operation, not of her making, that she had to do the best to adjust on. I mean, I've said here since the election, I don't blame Harris at all. I think she did a good job under the circumstances, given what she was handed. Would she have been our nominee had Biden dropped out last January and we had been able to run a full slate of primaries? I don't know. But at the point that Biden dropped out, Democrats really had no choice but to go with her. There was no way we could do any kind of rational, competitive process in the short few weeks between Biden dropping out and the national convention. But again, coming back to this, it wasn't just the economy. Trump was very good about exploiting cultural divides. He campaigned against transgender people, and the Harris campaign had no effective answer to that. Those ads were ubiquitous. Also, other cultural issues that he tapped into as well, and it all added up to a small popular vote win. He didn't get a majority, but enough so that under our electoral college system, he was clearly elected president.
So, I mean, you're essentially saying there were clear weaknesses to the Democrats, particularly on issue-based things, so that where they were an open target for the Republicans, and something that the Democrats really hadn't come to terms with themselves.
No, they've not. I mean, there have been a few Democrats since the election and said, look, we've got to figure out how to deal with these attacks on transgender people. We're not abandoning them, but we've got to have a more effective answer to these cultural issues. The issue of abortion continues to resonate out there. And then, of course, again, the economy. I think we Democrats have, it's been too much anti-Trump the last several years. We need to have our own positive economic program to go to people with and show them how we would be different than Trump. I think that's a very significant problem. You can see the FDR and Kennedy posters in the background here as I'm moving my office. They had affirmative economic programs that, even though they were wealthy individuals, they could relate to working people of all races and ethnicities in this country, and that accounted for their success. I think Democrats need to get back to that.
That was the astonishing thing for me, was coming into Detroit, first of all in September, then again in late October, was that you didn't have a clear message on the economy. And it seemed to me that you were by far a safer pair of hands than Trump would be. It would the obvious message to get across, but that wasn't the message that was put across. And now you have many voters who did vote for him, largely for economic reasons, because they thought the stock market would be up with him. It was briefly, and that they would be better off under Trump. I guess they've got buyer's remorse now.
Yes, I mean, there is some of that starting. We're starting to see layoffs in the auto industry here. I mean, your listeners should know that even though it's not the largest source of jobs in Michigan anymore, about 20% of our economy is auto dependent. We are extremely dependent on an export economy. The ties between us and Mexico, us and Canada are extremely close because of auto manufacturing. And so we're starting to see the early effects of the tariffs, the business uncertainty, and I think it could get quite bad here.
Yeah, well, I would love to talk about that a bit. I mean, the fifth largest exporter in the United States of all the states?
Yes, that's right. Even though our economy, I think, is about the 12th or 13th largest in the United States, fifth largest export economy for the reasons I just discussed. I mean, auto parts move across these borders half a dozen times before they end up in a manufactured automobile. And that means they're taxed every time they cross the border under this tariff system. It's going to drive up the cost of cars dramatically.
Yeah, okay. So there's clearly areas where you're going to have a huge amount to gain from us. I mean, we'll see what happens over the next weeks and months. Let's come back to the initial responses to Trump and what's been done. Let's just talk a bit more about some of the lawsuits. Can you say what has been done and what you think where they're heading and what effect they might have on the administration? You briefly said that you think it's a long process, but just describe some of those lawsuits.
Well, they fall into a variety of categories. Trump has done a lot of defunding, stopping the flow of money that had already been appropriated, was already in the process. There have been a number of lawsuits brought principally by our attorneys general, who are the elected lawyers, head lawyers for our states. There have been a lot of lawsuits brought there with a fair amount of initial success. But in that area, as well as others that I'll talk about in a moment, we're seeing defiance by Trump and his Department of Justice of the courts. they're really edging toward a real crisis here, because our courts can only be as effective as the respect for their orders. We see it also in this area of immigration, where there's a confrontation before our U.S. Supreme Court now about immigrants being deported without due process, without fair treatment, and the courts ordering them returned, and Trump saying, we can't. They're not in our jurisdiction or custody anymore. I mean, that is perilously close to what we would call contempt of court. Other structural changes, a number of the labor unions in the country, including here in Michigan, have filed suit over the mistreatment, the layoffs, the unfair treatment of their members. You know, first you're laid off and you're called back, you know, the uncertainty and the attacks on the workforce. And then finally, Nicholas, there's a whole series of actions by Trump which have generated pushback, and these are very dangerous. He's removed the safeguards that prevent corruption. He's gotten rid of people we call inspectors general, who are charged with investigating wrongdoing inside the bureaucracy. They take reports from whistleblowers. They conduct independent investigations. He's removed all the safeguards from the Department of Justice, which used to operate pretty independently of the president. Now pretty much he regards them as his own private law firm. We see him attacking law firms who either housed or have been part of his opposition. That was something neither party had ever done before. Attacking universities and other places that he believes have in the past been home to his opposition. And in some cases, unfortunately, these universities, some of these law firms have caved in to his extortion, to his threats. And that sends a real chilling message to others.
Including one leading Democratic law firm, and that was the first one to do. I've forgotten the name of them, who did a deal, and it's as much as it's $100 million in pro bono for causes that Trump supports. I mean, it was really a startling cave-in for and a precedent set for other firms, which is shocking.
Yes, I mean that's one of the largest firms in the world, Paul Weiss, headquartered in the United States, but they have clients all over the world. And it really was demoralizing and discouraging to see them cave so quickly. Fortunately, most of the firms under attack have pushed back and have resisted. But we really need solidarity in that regard. Some universities are caving as well. And that sends, again, a discouraging signal to the other universities who are under threat from Trump.
Yeah, no, absolutely shocking. I know that young lawyers, maybe Alex Norris, who's going to go to law school in September, can chime in on this. I think there are quite a few law graduates, who are basically not, steering well away from those firms and protests. But how much impact that's going to have is not clear. So I mean, that's the court. So I do want to come back to the Supreme Court itself, where you have some key conservative figures, and obviously we all know that it's a conservative court. But think of Amy Coney Barrett. Is it Coney Barrett? Who has her stance on some of these issues is not quite what the White House might expect. So there is some institutional resistance there.
Yes, I mean we had a very significant case yesterday involving this innocent man who was deported to El Salvador. The fight yesterday was over which court should hear it, and the Supreme Court said you're in the wrong court, you need to go file elsewhere. But in the course of that, the court went out of its way, at least on paper, to say these immigrants are entitled to due process in the United States before they are deported. And Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh reinforced that in their own way. Kavanaugh wrote separately. Coney Barrett joined the dissenters in part on that point. But again, it remains to be seen. That immigrant has now been sent to one of the most conservative federal courts in the country, in one of our very conservative federal court districts. Louisiana. So we'll see what kind of due process he gets. But that is now the leading case in terms of how these cases are going to be handled.
Okay, well, let's come back to Michigan again. You've highlighted, well, I mean, how do you think it's going to play out in Michigan? I mean, this is it's an easy one for you. This is a traditionally been a Democratic state, but it's gone slightly purple, and Trump was able to win it during the in the presidential, which is shocking.
Well, again, I think he was very smart. Ever since he started his campaigns back in 2016, he has exploited the concerns, the anxiety of working people, and that started back, frankly, under Democrats and NAFTA under Clinton back in the 90s, where we saw a steady exporting of jobs, particularly to Mexico. And Trump tapped into that. Democrats have not had an effective answer to that. People like me in the Democratic Party have said, look, we need a national industrial policy. We need to make sure these workers are taken care of and provided with retraining and other jobs like many other countries. Germany comes to mind.
Okay, so Mark, let me, I want to chip in on that. The point there is when you say an industrial policy, what does that mean? Do you still think that Michigan should be a manufacturing base that provides lots of jobs for blue collar workers?
Well, yes, but even before we had the loss of jobs for free trade, factories are being automated at a tremendous rate. That's one of the major sources, if not the major source of it. But you can still be a manufacturing state, even though the number of jobs declines. You can use that manufacturing base, as Biden was attempting to do with us, to move us into other types of manufacturing in the alternative energy field, for example, and tech fields. You can use that engineering and other backgrounds and expertise to move into that field while maintaining the auto manufacturing base as well. So these are not mutually exclusive. I'm not anti-free trade, but free trade, as all of you know, it has beneficiaries, many of us, but also there's groups of people whom it hurts. And we've got to make sure they are taken care of, if not for moral reasons, then for political reasons, because you get the political backlash we've now experienced in Michigan and in the country generally.
I want you to talk a bit about what you do, because you're really in the center of this battle and you're behind several election campaigns for the midterms. So I want you to talk a bit about that. But also, what's your message? I mean, how can you actually shape industrial policy in the state? I mean, are there any measures that you can take that are going to have a real impact on voters yet?
Yeah, my work is a mix of political consulting, but principally I'm a lawyer for a lot of political organizations and candidates. I recently announced U.S. Senate candidate Mallory McMorrow is my client. One of the leading candidates for governor, Jocelyn Benson, is another client. And one of the things I'm very excited about with them, they're a new generation, but they're also putting out a positive economic program for the people of Michigan and the country, we hope, to embrace. So I think that's the direction we need to go on, again, not just anti-Trump, but a positive program as well. We are fighting here in Michigan. One of the things that Trump has done is people have emulated his success. The Speaker of our Michigan House, the lower house in our state legislature, is nothing more than a Trump imitator, mimicking his tactics, defying the norms. And I'm involved in an important piece of litigation.
What's his name again? I think we're due to meet him last time.
His name is Matt Hall. Very much. And this is true of almost all Republican parties in the state and most Republican legislatures. They're in thrall to him, and they feel very much intimidated by him. And if they dare cross him, he and Musk, their allies, will come after them at election time.
So what's your betting? I mean, what's your strategy as you take those candidates to the midterms? I mean, there are 2 points to it. One is, exploiting what happens in the next few months, but the second point is, what have you got to offer?
That's correct. I mean, it has to be a two-pronged approach. Point out where Trump has caused significant problems, particularly economic problems, because that's, I think, where he's most vulnerable. He's not going to lose his hardcore base. They are going to support him through thick and thin, even if it costs them their jobs. But there were a lot of independent voters and others who supported him because, again, they thought, well, I'll take a risk on a bigot, on a demagogue, because he might fix the economy. It's those people that these candidates can appeal to in a positive way. And not just the two I mentioned, but across the board as Democrats run for Congress and as they run for our state legislature as well.
Okay, I'd love to get questions, people. If you're listening in, please do put your question in the Q&A box just below, or just raise your hand, and then you can put your question to Mark Brewer. We're going to come back to Michigan in a second. I mean, I want to talk about the fundamentals of populism and where we go from here. And so we'll come back to what you're doing about that in Michigan in a sec. But before that, there's some irony here, isn't there? That the Trump has changed the power of the presidency. It's now investing a huge amount of power within it, and actually, doing away with the balance of power. So I've got two parts to that. If you're state orientated, if you believe in state intervention, as some Democrats used to, surely that's a good thing. And then the second thing really is are some of these changes irreversible?
I think on the first point, we're seeing the culmination of what started under President Roosevelt. And Democrats have generally been, you're right, Nicholas, in favor of strong state intervention, with Roosevelt, with Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and others. We have seen
even Clinton.
State. I'm sorry?
Even Clinton, or think of Obama.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We've seen the state as one way, a very important way to address societal problems. But unfortunately, that also means that if you empower the state, when somebody who disagrees with you, particularly radically like Trump does, he can then exercise that power. So that's one problem. The other problem that's occurred here is that the Congress, our Congress, on a bipartisan basis, has given up all these powers. They basically have surrendered the ability to wage war to the president. These tariffs, our Constitution says the power to levy tariffs is vested in the Congress, but they have passed laws that have enabled Trump to do this unilaterally. And so that's a second real serious institutional problem that we have.
But that's surely something you can reclaim within 2 years.
Well, if we retake the Congress, yes, but then the trouble is you've got to pass a law that Trump could veto. So you've got to have overwhelming majorities in order to repeal those laws. These are some of the things Democrats should have done when they were in charge. When Biden had control of the Congress, we could have repealed some of these extreme laws. I mean, Trump is resurrecting laws that were enacted to deal with the British and the French back in the late 1700s. But he's resurrecting them and using them, particularly in this anti-immigration effort. Those are laws that should have been erased from the books. But now he comes along and he's exploiting them.
We've got some questions coming through, so I'll take a question from Carlos D in just a second. I had just one other thought. No, let's take a question from Carlos if we can get him up. Yeah, I'll just wait for him to come up, and then they can put his question there. There we go. Go ahead, Carlos. Just open your microphone. You just need to open your microphone, which is probably on the bottom left-hand side of yours. There you go, Carlos. Go ahead. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. You may have an issue there. I'll ask it for him. He says, is there any prospect of congressional Republicans opposing Trump if the stock market does not recover?
I think there's some prospect, and actually I made a short list of the ways to stop Trump. And I think that is one of them. Unfortunately, these Republicans are so intimidated and scared of Trump that things are going to have to get so bad that they fear for their own reelection. That will motivate them because nothing else, I think, will. Some of them are opposing him on principle. We've seen a couple of Republican senators saying these tariffs are a lousy idea, et cetera, et cetera. But before more of their colleagues will join them, it will take threats to their own reelection before they'll push back publicly against Trump.
Yeah. And in the meantime, what damage do you think is permanent? What things do you think are going to be very hard to get back? You've already described the tricky issue within Congress, and that you're going to have a major victory within a Democratic majority within Congress to be able to repeal that law, some of those laws that give Trump that unilateral ability to take whichever decisions. But what are the, if you think of the inspectors general, if you think of the pursuit of universities and how they've been cowed by administration that's just basically, in my view, curbing free speech. Where do you, I mean, can you give an assessment of what's been done in just these 100 days and what do you think has been harmed?
Well, I mean, not only stretching the law, but the destruction of norms and customs. I mean, so much of how a democracy functions, you can't make a law about everything, right? So we've developed customs and norms, and he's busted through all of those. I mean, and you can see it even in international relations, which we haven't talked on. I mean, how is any other country in the world ever going to trust the United States again, right? Given what has happened in the last even less than 100 days. And the same thing here. If you're a federal employee, and we have all these laws and protections for you, due process, how are you ever going to trust that? Why would you want to work for the federal government? And it just goes on and on and on. And the boundaries he's pushed, politicizing our Department of Justice, getting rid of these inspectors general and so forth, that means that others in the future could exploit those and push them even further, and unless we pull that back. So I think we've crossed some very serious boundaries here, and I'm afraid some of them are not going to get restored.
Okay, well, let's think of boundaries that were pushed in the last century or more. Roosevelt, 3 terms, restricted to 2, constitutional. Is that a constitutional change or not? If you think of the constitutional, so that's one. McCarthyism and the way people were pursued for alleged links to communism. That was just something within a political movement, but he was disgraced afterwards. What can be reclaimed and how?
Well, I think there can be legal changes. Our Constitution is extremely difficult to change. It takes, I believe, 2/3 of the Congress and then 3/4 of the states. And given how polarized this country is, I would not look to constitutional amendments to rein in any of this. Statutes can be changed, but again, with the presidential veto, you need a supermajority in our Congress, in our U.S. House and our U.S. Senate to make those. That might be possible. We saw some of this in the wake of Watergate, where there were such terrible abuses by President Nixon, and the country on a bipartisan basis did institute some protections, many of which have been pushed aside now in terms of protections and the depolitization of the Justice Department. They can be restored, but it's going to take a Republican Party and Republican elected officials in the Congress who are willing to do that. And I'm not sure, I don't think this current crew is going to do that. Many of them have gotten into power by emulating Trump, by behaving just like him. And so I think we've made a cultural shift in the country that I think is going to be very difficult to reverse.
So you're almost saying there has to be some kind of cataclysmic, well, maybe not cataclysmic, but severe economic and political repercussions for Republicans to be convinced that they need to go back on it.
Or removed from power. I mean, like we saw in 1932, just an overwhelming Democratic wave, which then, used appropriately, could correct some of these legal and statutory problems that we had by enacting new laws. But people will have to pay attention to that. I mean, I hate to wish that on the country or on the world, but it may take that, Nicholas, at this point.
Yeah, I want to get Alex Norris to chip in a second. So, Alex, if you in a moment can just open your microphone and your camera, and so you can get some questions in too. Alex helped set up both our Michigan tour and our Pennsylvania tour, and is, for those who don't know, is the sort of key person behind the research that we do and the website. So, Alex, if you've got any additional thoughts or questions, do chip in. I have got plenty more, but Alex, over to you.
Yeah, it's been fascinating so far. I did want to ask, there is this pressure, you're hearing some people in the Democratic Party saying that one way to beat Trump and this MAGA movement in general is to emulate it like you're saying Republicans are. So there's some pressure within the camp, and some, I've been reading some predictions that the party itself might go more populist. The Democrats might mimic some of the things that Trump has done successfully. I guess out of curiosity, from I know that you're obviously Michigan, which your governor is oftentimes seen as probably one of the candidates you could see in 2028. But what do you think about this potential shift of the Democratic Party as well towards populism, towards this cult of personality, and trying to, again, emulate what Trump has done successfully?
And I'm thinking of a particular senator in your state, Alex, Mr. Fetterman, who's certainly got
Yeah.
a populist edge to him.
But there's been some conversations too, as crazy as it sounds, of a popular sports commentator. People are talking about potentially being the next person. So there's lots of people talking about media as this new frontier, and bringing in people who can speak to a camera and sound a lot like Trump, right? Dominate the headlines in the same way that he's done.
Well, I think we have to be very, very careful. There's no question that Democrats have been out-organized in terms of the new media in this country, and we need to fight back very effectively on that. But I certainly am not in favor of a Democratic demagogue like Trump. I think you can be an economic populist in a positive way, advocate for the rights of workers, advocate for fair trade, and negotiate with our allies and friends rather than confront them and fight with them. So I think there are ways to be an economic populist without all the demagoguery that Trump brings. I think that's a path we need to shun and not reinforce.
My take for quite a long time on US politics is two things. I think there's been a shift to the right, particularly in the Republican Party, and to some degree to the left in the Democrats, but not. I don't think it's been affected in the same way. Gerrymandering of electoral districts. This means you do not have to appeal to a broad electoral base. And as a consequence, you've seen the Republican Party go from Newt Gingrich to the Tea Party, and then Trump as a final incarnation of this populist push. And then the other point is, so that if you're not competing with, if you don't have any Democrats in your area, you don't have to appeal to the center at all. There's no incentive for you to do so. So that's why it's become more extreme. And then the other point is the Supreme Court decision allowing commercial money in elections. If you had a system like ours, the amount of money that you're restricted to per constituency is in the tens of thousands of dollars. It's not millions, it's tens of thousands. And it really means that money has very little say. And in this, there's, I think, Brexit, there was a bit of a blip with that, and social media is another issue. But fundamentally, the fact that you have so much money and the gerrymandering of electoral districts, for me, means your democracy is fundamentally flawed.
I know those are both very serious problems. Unfortunately, our Supreme Court has said it will not take on the challenge of gerrymandering. I was part of one of the lawsuits that the Supreme Court of the United States tossed out when we attacked gerrymandering here in Michigan.
Essentially, because it's a state's right to fix electoral districts as it sees which and not a federal issue.
So we've had to fight that issue out on a state-by-state basis. We've been successful here in Michigan on that. Other states have been successful. But it remains a problem, Nicholas. You're absolutely right. Money in politics, another significant problem. Source, our United States Supreme Court, starting in the 70s, when it said spending money is the equivalent of free speech. I think that set us off on a wrong path. But again, we're left to our own devices at the state level. And these are two of the projects I'm actually working on to try to get at least more disclosure and restraint in the amount of money. Sometimes we're fortunate, we get the backlash like we saw last week in Wisconsin, where Musk and all of his money just generated a backlash, but that's not the typical situation.
Yeah.
But we've got to try to find a way to rein in this influence of money, because there's no doubt that they're buying elections.
So what are you doing in Michigan? If this is a state-by-state issue, what's going on there?
What we're looking at, and this is, it's not any particular secret, amendment to our state constitution, which would require vastly more disclosure of the source of this money. I mean, in Michigan, we have a particularly bad problem where vast sums of money are spent, but nobody knows where it comes from. And I think that's a part of the solution. I think that's part of what helped us in Wisconsin last week, because people knew that Musk was the source of the money. When it's hidden like that, you have people with very nefarious motives who can get away with that. So we're working on really more disclosure of that. We've also got to work on breaking the connection between moneyed interests and our elected officials who can receive gifts. And our lobbying laws are terrible in terms of disclosure and the amount of influence that lobbyists can have on our state legislature. So there are various efforts here in Michigan to amend our state laws and our state constitution to try to combat some of those problems.
Unless we have more questions, people, I'm going to wrap up shortly. So if you do have a question, please do put it in the Q&A box pretty quickly. And then we can take you can put it directly to Mark. I've got one here from Richard M. And so he can't ask the question directly, so I'm doing it for him. He says, I'm really interested how you believe you can motivate Democratic activists on the ground in election campaigns. I'll be out knocking on doors later today in Hampshire, England, but even at this distance from Trump, a lot of activists are feeling powerless and demotivated. Do you think that's changed in the last few weeks?
I think it's starting to change. I mean, we had some tremendous rallies around the country over the weekend. You mentioned the Booker speech early on, Nicholas, the election results last week. And I think our candidates will change that as new, younger Democratic candidates with fresh ideas emerge. I think that will all build on the anti-Trump sentiment. So I'm not concerned too much about Democratic turnout next year. I think that will come. But the problem is, what are we going to do in the interim to prevent all the damage that Trump is already causing?
This is an opinion I share. I think the damage has been colossal. And I'm also not sure that many people in the States realized to what extent the United States' reputation and soft power has been damaged. And that soft power was colossal. And I'm always reminded by the families we saw in Iowa during the Iowa caucuses. And I thought that sort of typified America's approach to the world. These people were cared about their checkbook. They thought they'd do better under Trump. They were going to vote for him. And they had no clue or little care about what was going on in Ukraine. They really didn't see it as their business. The consequence of the last 100 days is, I think, as you say, trust in the United States has evaporated, and it's gone really forever. How can you rely on the United States to arm you and to protect you if you're going to have a president who's going to be close to Vladimir Putin? You know, it's over. That it really is that dramatic. Yet in conversations I've had with people who I see as highly informed about the American political system within the States, don't seem to appreciate that fact. I don't know if you share that view.
No, I agree with you. I come from a more internationally oriented family. My father served in the military in the Far East. I've traveled extensively overseas. I really enjoy it. So I like to think I'm a little less parochial than your average American, and a student of history as well. And I agree with you, Nicholas. It's a very serious problem. Our commitment to NATO, our commitment to Japan and Taiwan, to Australia. I mean, how can any of these countries now say the United States has my back if I'm threatened by Putin or threatened by China? It's a very serious destabilizing problem. I'm very concerned about the outbreak of hostilities.
And also the advantage that China can take in the interim. First of all, the United States doesn't have your back. You can't rely on them, so you better listen to us.
No, that's right. And they may not need to go to war to take Taiwan or to intimidate Korea or Japan if the United States is a weak partner. So we've spent a lot of time this morning to talk about ramifications domestically, but the international ramifications, I think, if anything, are worse.
Yeah, no, definitely. Let's come back to the domestic, though, because this is primarily what we're talking to you about. We've got Maureen who's asking a question. She says, can you ask about the future of Democratic presidential candidates for 2028, or is it too early? Alex was talking about this, about new media, candidates coming to the fore. I mean, I'm struck. I don't know why it's seen as though the Democratic Party doesn't have good candidates. It clearly does. It's just that they elected an octogenarian instead of them. But give us a flavour of who you think are the key candidates and where you think someone might, who they might be and where they might come from.
Well, I think we have a lot of great governors. The governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, the governor of Kentucky, Andy Bashir, the governor of Illinois, Pritzker. I don't know if he's interested in running or not, but there are a lot of great Democratic governors out there, many of whom are on the cutting edge of opposing Trump. The Senate, I think, is another possibility. Maybe Cory Booker has laid the foundation for a presidential run come 2028. But I think, I mean, while a lot of these candidates are preparing and thinking about running and so forth, it's a long way to 2028. And we've got to get through 2026 first. Many of these are, folks are incumbents. They have to run for re-election, or they'll be looking at the end of their terms and what they're going to do. We've mentioned this morning some of these younger candidates in Michigan, Benson and McMorrow, who are up-and-comers in our own state politics. I think they're the future of the Democratic Party, not in 2028, but beyond. So I think there is a deep bench there. I think we'll have a very competitive presidential primary process starting in 2027 and into 2028. And I feel pretty confident we'll have a good candidate. Obviously, we have other issues with Trump as well. He's already threatening to try to run for a third term. We don't know what that means, whether he's serious about it. You never know with him. And if he doesn't run, who's his heir, right? Is it J.D. Vance? Will he inherit a mess created by Trump? Maybe things will turn around by then. So it's just very difficult to look at a crystal ball at 2028, Nicholas, but I tried to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the names that I'm hearing anyway.
Yeah, I'm always struck by Steve Bannon's phrase, which he talks about muzzle velocity. You have to put out so many headlines each day that you completely obliterate what the opposition might have to say, and then that's your victory. You dominate the headlines. Right. Trump's attitude is so much consumed by this, whether it's the Heritage Foundation and providing him with the ammunition and the policies, that there's a momentum to this and a chaotic momentum. And if they continue doing it at this pace here, I mean, the repercussions are, I mean, it doesn't seem to have a very clear strategy to it. So you can only presume it is going to be very, very chaotic and very, very damaging. And I would presume that you're going to reap the rewards.
Well, chaotic and damaging and exhausting. I think it was one of the reasons Trump lost in 2020. The country was exhausted by the manic, and it's even worse now, his manic approach to governing. People want normalcy. They want stability and certainty, and they're certainly not getting it.
Yeah, and it is exhausting waking up every morning, having to look at the newspaper headlines or through the day, just looking at your phone, seeing out what else is done. And even before he was elected, I'm thinking, oh, God, another 4 more years of this. I was quite happy to have peace for the past 4 years, relatively speaking. Mark Brewer, thank you very much indeed. This has been very enjoyable, if worrying, and we look forward to speaking to you again and possibly seeing you again if we come back to Michigan. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you, Nicholas.